The flashbacks are a little forceful. I don't like the voiceover either. I think voiceovers rarely work in films. Like, I'm glad they...
See, I feel flashback. I feel that way about flashbacks. Flashbacks rarely work in films.
Unless they're a central part of the story.
See, in part 2, I don't feel it's as much of a flashback as so much as a second story within that film. It's a linear...
Yeah.
There are two stories in that film.
It's a linear storyline presented as flashback.
Exactly.
But it's not,
I feel it's presented separately from the story, because it's not Michael flashing back to that issue. Vito's dead.
Yeah.
The only people in the flashback to be thinking back on it are dead.
Yeah.
Except maybe Mom, but we don't see her flashing back.
Michael's in some way imagining what the life of his father from maybe stories he heard and trying to think, okay, what would Dad have done in this situation?
And that's fine, but it's not really a flashback. Whereas in this one, I don't like flashbacks normally, because I feel like flashbacks sometimes work. But sometimes if you're just throwing them in as a quick, hey, remember this?
Yeah.
Or we're going to... this character you're watching is going to show you this. No, give me a backstory. Recently, an example would be... The most recent example I can think of, I went to see Colombiana last month.
Yeah.
Colombiana sets up the backstory separately. It opens with a different story. It's not a flashback.
Yeah.
It opens up and sets up that story that is necessary for understanding the rest of the film, and then moves into the present, which I like. Yeah. I much prefer that to, say, starting the film off in the present, and then her all of a sudden sitting down at a table somewhere, and then we're removed from the present story, we're thrown back to give back information. And in this film, I feel it's only thrown in there as a kind of, in case you've forgotten, remember what happened at the end of the second one.
Yeah.
And that I didn't like as much.
I think one of the best introductions I've seen like that is actually in the Two Towers with the Balrog scene, because you start with the view over the mountains, and then you zoom into that moment where Gandalf's having his showdown, and as a viewer you're thinking, wait, I've seen this before, and then he says, "Fly, you fools!" and at that very moment it splits from the linear line of the Fellowship into Gandalf, rushing down with the chasm with the sword and fighting the Balrog, and that's of course it's an exciting scene, but it's an interesting way of utilizing previous film to re-immerse someone into a story. Obviously, it was only a year's difference time between the two films versus 16 years between part 2 and part 3.
Which is, I think, where we can... This doesn't... I think, if you look at this and think, this is a continuation, you're immediately going to be hit.
Yeah. Hit
in the head, and you're going to be incorrect, because the scene does not pick up with Michael. The first image we have of Michael, he's not sitting somewhere alone. A continuation would have been, a striking continuation, I think, would have been the first image of Michael sitting in the apartment, sitting at his desk.
Originally, they were going to start it. That scene where he's speaking with the head of the Vatican Bank.
Yeah.
And where he's like, has the cigarette in his mouth and I need $600 million. That scene was going to be the scene that starts the film, and they were going to juxtapose it with the opening scene of The Godfather, where I believe in America. That particular scene.
See, which is where I thought, when we originally thought we were going to talk about the original one. Yeah. I admit I love the first one more than I love the second one. Although the second one is as close to being equal with an original as I think a sequel could possibly be.
Yep.
From beginning to end, from the very first moment of that film, the very end of that film, I see so little fault. I need a magnifying glass to see any. If
you have to be really nitpicky to find something.
I agree.
To complain about.
Right. You have to be pardon me. You have to be a prick.
Yeah.
A real prick to find fault with the first one. And the second one I feel is almost the same way.
Yeah.
This one does not open up. It opens up strongly, but not as strongly. I also feel the first one has, while it is that linear story, it's based on something else. It's a commentary on something else. Hence why the first line of the first film is "I believe in America." Yeah.
Well, it's Coppola's commentary on capitalism.
Right.
Actually, it's about greed and lust for power,
which is where the Immobiliare story comes in on this one.
Yeah,
the problem is it's not like the first one. It's not subtle. Immobiliare corrupt.
Yeah.
The church corrupt.
And Michael's saying the higher I go, the more corrupt it is. And,
right.
the politicians in Rome, they're the true mafia.
Exactly.
And like, oh geez, can you be more
blatant?
More blatant about how the corruption of institution. But yeah, I just like those, like the board meeting of the gangsters, and they actually in The Godfather, they where Vito and Don Tatalia have their little agreement, and then where the Don realizes it's actually Don Bosnini that's been the one pulling the strings all along. But it was filmed in this room. It was actually, I believe, the boardroom of a railroad. It was a railroad company, and that's actually the image behind them. And they make that comment. Of course, the Don can charge us for his services with his influential people. After all, we're not communists, and I love those little jabs in that.
See, what I find,
it's not personal. It is business.
It is
about accumulation of power and wealth.
I have to go back and look, but the building that they show from the outside before that meeting, that's the building that houses the Federal Reserve in New York City. That's the present day.
It might be.
I feel that the way I've always looked, that's a striking.
Yeah, we can go back and look at that. And actually, there was that other scene where Mary goes to visit Vincent in that room, and I thought it is the building that's in the first film. It's that sequence after Michael kills the police officer and Salazzo. There's that little sequence of newspaper headlines and that little flashback of how they're all kind of having to hunker down because the heat's on. But there's that image where all the men are eating spaghetti and planning and such, and I think it's the same building. I think it's the same room as in the first one. So I'll have to go back and check those correlations out after this. But yeah, did we cover everything? I think, or
I think we almost
beaten the horse to death. Yeah, no.
In the end, final words on the film.
Final words. Like I said, I have a better respect for the film. I think I'm more, if anything, I think I'm more tolerant of it as a film.
I still like it.
Yeah.
I admit that the more I see this film, if I'm thinking about the first two, I am much more critical.
Yeah.
And I find the greater faults and the things I wish he had changed.
Yeah.
But in the end, separated from the first two, which is, I admit, difficult to do, but if you succeed in doing that, I feel that this is still a worthy film of viewing and a noble effort.
Yeah. So it's the least standalone of all of them, I think. The second one somewhat depends on the first, but not so much versus this one, which is arguably entirely dependent on the other two. So,
except for the fact that the first 30 minutes are spent introducing us to characters we've never met before.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know how much of a Ebert fan you are, but
I love Roger Ebert.
He gave the second Godfather film 3 stars when he rated it. He gave this one 3.5. So which is interesting.
I love Roger, but I disagree with him on many
films. Yeah. But all right. So anyway, that's.
Well, thank you.
All right, no problem. We should do this again whenever you aren't reviewing a film on the rare occasions on the weekends. But
I agree. We'll find
another film that we need to contemplate about a lot. So
we'll start working.
But this has been our Godfather Love Fest. So thanks for listening.
This has been a VS1 production.